Oh, hello! My name is Mara, and welcome to Books Like Whoa. So I thought it was time for me to do another Know Your Tropes video in my little series I've got going here, and today we're going to do literary fiction. I was inspired to do this because I read Ayiti this morning. I finished it and loved it, as I think you've already seen by now. So it just reminded me that I love lots of things about literary fiction, and yeah, just wanted to get into some of the tropes I love. Now, some people might find this to be somewhat controversial because I think that there's this sense that literary fiction is without tropes, that it is just good fiction, and it's only commercial fiction or genre fiction that has things like tropes. Well, my friends, I hate to break it to you, but just because there's a lot of books about mopey white guys just thinking about women that they want to fuck doesn't mean that that's not a trope. It's a very boring trope in my opinion, but it is a trope nonetheless. It is not just general fiction and like the gold standard or the platonic ideal of fiction. It is still a trope. So anyway, with that little rant over, yeah, I definitely came up with a few things that I consistently enjoy in literary fiction and some things that I consistently do not enjoy in literary fiction. So hopefully this will invite you to also reflect on your preferences and maybe get to know yourself a little bit better as a reader. So let's get into this. Okay, for things that I enjoy in literary fiction, the first thing I wrote down was I am a sucker for literary fiction set in some kind of boarding school. I love school stories, or even if not a boarding school, at least like a prep school or like a school where one is expected to spend a lot of time with the students and teachers at that school. I really enjoy that as a setting. That is always something that I look for in literary fiction. I also, in terms of just style-wise, simple, beautiful prose tends to be my preference, especially for literary fiction written, let's say maybe post World War II. That is definitely my preference as opposed to more like flowery language. That's something that I do enjoy in older fiction, which we'll get into here in a minute, but kind of post World War II, I do just sort of like clarity of language that is well chosen. Like well chosen simple language is really what I enjoy style-wise in literary fiction. In terms of plot, I do tend to prefer either a mystery plot or a romance plot in literary fiction. It doesn't mean that that is a mystery genre book or a romance genre book, but just that the plot engine is centered around either a mystery or a romance. That tends to kind of be my preference. I think that those plot engines tend to lend some level of structure to the book, and when we get into things I don't like, you will see that things that are just sort of meandering, I have less patience for, so I do kind of like the comfort of those sort of plot engine conventions, and that is something I look for in literary fiction. In terms of setting, I do really like historical literary fiction, and that is probably because I love classics so much. That's what I grew up reading because I was a pretentious asshat of a child. I read a lot of classics, and so I do really like the historical settings of literary fiction. Like that's something that will draw me in. And likewise, I also really enjoy specifically 19th century literature, often British, but I also like some of the French writers from that period as well. And I do generally prefer European literary fiction to American literary fiction. I'm not sure why, but like definitely for classics. Like I feel like a very unpatriotic when it comes to my classic reading because I don't really like a lot of the kind of great American novelists. Like I don't like Steinbeck, I don't like Melville. I'm not like a Kerouac person or whatever. Like I tend to prefer European writers for literary fiction in general, but definitely when it comes to classics. So yeah, anyway, all that to say, like anything in the 19th century, I'm gonna be pretty excited about, and in that context, I'm okay with more kind of what we would today see as flowery language, though really, I mean, people talk about someone like, I don't know, Thackeray or Dickens or whoever being a little hard to get through, but if you actually read, like if you will commit yourself to diving into one of those gigantic books, I actually think that part of why they've stood the test of time is because they aren't that hard to read. Like they are really enjoyable, and I think that they do have a level of clarity to their language. The difference being that language has just evolved since then, so sometimes things are a little more obscure for that reason. But anyway, I'm rambling. All that to say, 19th century classic literature is something I really enjoy in literary fiction. Okay, getting into like a plot device that I enjoy in literary fiction, I do tend to really like secret life, like a secret life plot or a like secret past type plot. Yeah, I enjoy that being, this usually is tied in, well, it could be a mystery or a romance, I'll take that back, but often like kind of a more mystery plot. I like it when the mystery is like, what is this person hiding? Like, I enjoy that in literary fiction. I also really enjoy fairy tale retellings. Like, I am a sucker for those, especially ones that are kind of beautifully written, which is why I think they work in literary fiction often. So I really enjoy that. Another plot kind of convention while we're on this area, I do really like Bildungsromans. I would say in general, I prefer a Bildungsroman over a YA novel, just because I think that the themes in those are usually a little bit more interesting or sophisticated, and it's usually, though there's definitely tropes within Bildungsromans, like there's a lot of angst usually, but it's less conventional or predictable, I think, than contemporary YA tends to be. So yeah, I do enjoy that as a kind of type of story. And then finally, just short stories in general, because short stories tend to be more literary. There definitely are genre short stories, and I love those and wish more people would do those, and novellas. Like, I'm a sucker for the short story and novella format in general, but a lot of them do tend to be literary fiction, and that is probably today my favorite version of literary fiction in terms of form, just because I think a lot of what literary fiction does well works better when they have less pages to fill. I think things can start to get a little navel-gazy and a little boring, honestly, unless it's just a really, really well-written book and with really compelling characters. Once you start getting past the like 150, 200 page mark, I think literary fiction, at least for my taste, is less likely to be successful. So I really enjoy short stories as like my preferred method for getting literary fiction. So moving into some things that I don't like, I've already alluded to a couple of these, so I'll just go ahead and say, like I was just saying, I don't like kind of like navel-gazy fiction, like where it's just like there's nothing happening, and the character is not interesting enough for me to be okay with nothing happening. If the character is really well done, one of the examples I have, this is the case, there doesn't have to be a ton of plot if I'm into the writing and into the character. I just think that there's not as many people who can do that well as get published as literary fiction. That's just my opinion. But I tend to get really impatient if nothing is happening and there's nothing else to hold my interest. In terms of writing style, I was talking about how I really enjoy simple, beautiful prose. What I do not enjoy is prose that I think is meant to read as stream of consciousness or like slam poetry. And the way that this is accomplished is that it is present tense, which I'm always a little on the fence about present tense. Rhyme. But anyway, present tense is already a little iffy for me, but when you add constant ands in with it, I cannot deal with it. So that would be like, I am going up the stairs, and I am coming into the kitchen, and I am making myself a sandwich, and I am hearing her call for me, and I am wondering where I will go next, and I am thinking about how I need to tie my shoes, and I am like these run-on sentences with this is a particular prose style that is popular, or like I have encountered more than I care to. It happens a lot in short stories as well. I can probably put up with it for a short story if it's one of a collection, but like if that's a whole book, forget about it. I really do not enjoy that as a prose choice. I also, in general, do not like how sexual assault is handled in literary fiction. I say that. I often don't like how it's handled in many genres, but particularly literary fiction. If that is the only thing that has happened in the book, I'm usually not going to be that into it. I think it gets kind of like dwelt upon in a way that I'm often uncomfortable with. I think that sometimes, honestly, it's just too real for me. Like, it's triggering for me, and I don't want to just like linger in someone's memory of that or portrayal of that. And yeah, I think I'm usually more okay with it as a backstory in either mystery or romance, and sometimes like other genre stuff, but because it's usually a backstory that the heroine, because it's usually a heroine. Side note, there needs to be more discussion in popular culture about male sexual assault. Like, that's a conversation we need to have more of. Anyway, almost always this is the heroine's backstory in commercial fiction. And I'm more okay with it often there because it's usually just a part of her story, and usually it's serving a counterpoint where she is now like stronger and has like survived and is moving forward in her life. So it's not something I have to dwell in as much. In literary fiction, I mean, honestly, especially if it's well written, it gets too real, and it either gets too real or it feels almost like fetishized, and I'm not comfortable with that. So yeah, in general, in literary fiction, that's not something that will attract me. I'll put up with it if it's there, but it's not something I look for. So another one I put down is the authors feeling themselves. And that's kind of like a vague, nebulous statement, but I do find that in literary fiction, more often than in other types of fiction, you can tell the author is like, I am such a good writer. This is so deep. This is so profound. I am going to be memorialized in the literary canon. Like, anytime I get a whiff of that's being the authorial attitude, I am out, because I'm just like, sweetheart, you are not that special, probably. And I don't have time. I would rather be reading someone who's more concerned with my pleasure than theirs. Basically, that's like having a bad lover. It's a bad literary lover. It's just like, you're only thinking about yourself. You're not thinking about me and my enjoyment. So, deuces. Okay, and then I've got two plot ones and one character one left. The two plot ones, first one being, I don't tend to like road trip books. I don't know why, but I'm just not that into them. And that is a big thing in literary fiction. Some people love that. So like, it's not that I don't think it's bad. It's just not my thing. The way that boarding school books are my thing, road trip books are not so much my thing. And then what I call the domestic Suburbans are not usually my thing. This is where it's mostly like an examination of like a housewife or like somebody feeling constrained in their domestic life in the suburbs. Usually is not going to do it for me. There usually needs to be something a little more going on for me to enjoy that, or it just has to be exceptionally well written. Most of these can be overcome if something is exceptionally well written, but yeah, I don't tend to love sort of like the middle class angst of a domestic suburban. And then finally, the last one is a character type, and what I wrote down was white guys who think all women want to fuck them. So I don't enjoy it when the male POV character is pretty sure that every woman he encounters is like really into him and ready to get it on. There's a lot of really arrogant white writers out there, and yeah, I think we're progressing past that maybe in the literary, I don't know. I was about to say that. I think that there's a lot of really pretentious white guys who are writing sort of like fantasies, who probably are pretty good writers, but they write these fantasies about like all women just like being DTF at all times. I think that this is less done now than it was like in the mid to late 20th century. So like, you know, I think that somewhat this era is passing, but it definitely still exists. And like, anytime I spot that guy in a book, I'm like, I'm good. You can continue to live in this little fantasy that you've got going on, but I don't need to be a party to it. So I thought I'd end with some examples of some literary fiction that I've really loved, and kind of talk about why. So the one that inspired this was Ayiti, which is a short story collection from Roxane Gay, which I did a yay or nay review, which I'll link somewhere. I just love it. It's beautiful, simple prose. It's I should have put that as any thematically what I'm into is feminist stuff. Like I tend to really like that. It has that going on. It is just, it's a short story collection, which I love, and it's beautifully written, and it's interesting ideas, and it's just all the things. It's really, really good. So that's one. Another example of one that I don't have in physical form at the moment is The Quiet American by Greene. I really like Greene in general. And The Quiet American I love because it does have like some historical aspect to it. So it was written before the Vietnam War, but it is extremely kind of like foreseeing how the Vietnam War is going to go down, and it's fascinating. So it's got kind of a mystery plot in it, but it's really well written. Again, simple, beautiful prose is how I would describe Graham Greene, and I really like that one. The Bloody Chamber is probably my favorite short story collection of all time. I have a beautiful edition, hardback edition of this coming because the Everyman's Library just released that, but I absolutely love this collection. It is feminist, which I just mentioned. It is fairy tale retellings, dark fairy tale retellings, which are really my favorite. And yeah, just really like, the style is really interesting. Thematically very, feminist, but also just lots of interesting ideas in here. Yeah, this is probably my favorite short story collection, and I love short story collections. So yeah, this one definitely counts as a favorite. Gilead. Oh, I absolutely adore this book. This is somewhat going against some of the things I talked about that I don't like, because there's not a lot happening in here. And I guess it's sort of a domestic book. Yeah, I mean, actually, this is sort of a genre defier for me because there's not a lot going on in here, and it is a lot of sort of like self-musings. This is just so beautifully written, and the characters are so compelling, for me at least. I couldn't put this down. I read this in one sitting. I was weeping outside the classroom at grad school when I was reading this, and everyone came out when the class got out and were like, "Girl, are you okay?" Oh my gosh, I just love this book so much. And like I said, I guess it is a little bit of a genre defier, but it does have like a historical element to it that I really enjoy in terms of like kind of spanning generations and like how sort of like moral attitudes have evolved over time. And it also touches a lot, I think, on race and like race stuff in America. So anyway, I love this book. Something I guess I forgot to mention in my things that I enjoy are anytime literary fiction does a genre blend. So anytime something is like a literary Western, a literary fantasy, in this case a literary sci-fi, I tend to be really into that. And this is the best, probably my favorite sci-fi novel period, but absolutely the best literary sci-fi book I've ever read. It's Kazuo Ishiguro, who will show up again here in a minute, and I absolutely adore him, and this is a fantastic book. I never saw the movie, but you shouldn't see the movie, just read the book, because the book is just so good, and don't have the ending ruined for you by the movie. Okay, Kazuo Ishiguro again, showing back up with my second favorite book of all time, which is The Remains of the Day. I adore this book. I love the prose style, simple and beautiful. It is historically set, which I really enjoy. Oh, another thing I forgot to mention. Sorry, I'm like coming up with more of these as I go. I also really enjoy epistolary novels. Like, I really enjoy that as a form. This is diary entries, but like basically like letters. And this book is just so good. You should just read it. Like, I don't need to say anything else. Just go read it. It's so good. AS Byatt, Possession. This is another literary novel I really, really enjoy. This one I would say has a very strong romance plot to it, as well as somewhat of a strong mystery element to it. It has a lot of historical elements. There's a dual timeline happening, and it is really nicely written. I really enjoy the style of this. So yeah, I mean, I just think that this is a really great book, and one that I read. I feel like this was a very like taste defining book for me. Like, when I read this, I started looking for other things like it because I realized how much I enjoyed it. So yeah, this is definitely one I would really recommend as well. And then short stories, more short stories I love. P.G. Wodehouse, probably my second favorite short storyist behind Angela Carter. I just love these. They're really funny, they're hilarious, and they evoke a time period. Like, it's historical, it definitely evokes a time period that I enjoy reading about. So yeah, this is like well written, very, again, simple, clean prose, but clear, funny short stories, everything I enjoy. And then finally, I mean, we couldn't exit this video without my favorite book of all time, which is Jane Eyre. This is a classic written in the 19th century in the UK. It has a romance plot to it. It has a mystery plot to it. It has really good prose, in my opinion, and wonderful character development. I wrote my thesis largely about this, so I'm very partial to it. I mean, I absolutely love Jane Eyre, and this is the epitome of what I enjoy in a book. I wish that I had more books like Jane Eyre that I could recommend alongside it, but I really, like, nothing ever compares, and very few things come even close. So I'm just a complete sucker for this book. I absolutely adore it, and it is the culmination of what I enjoy in literary fiction. So yeah, that is sort of an exploration of what I enjoy in literary fiction. Literary fiction is sort of like a nebulous kind of category. I'll definitely grant you that if you are writing that comment right now. I agree, it is. I kind of went with my gut in terms of what I felt like was or was not literary fiction, and yeah, these are just my opinions. So I would love to hear yours. So let me know what you think in the comments below, things that you enjoy in literary fiction, things you don't enjoy, etc., etc. So I think that will do it for this video. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below, and I think that will do it. I hope you're having a really great day, and I will talk to you soon. Bye!